Welcome everyone, you are tuned into RPG Radio and I'll be your host, Winback. On today's irregularly scheduled programming, our hero has purged the Arkovian Oligarchs from the Undercity, but it still feels like something's missing. That creeping feeling comes to a head on our way to meet with Calderos outside the steps of Torment. Before we can meet with our ghostly compatriot, however, we're distracted by a crumbling wall and the raving whispers of someone calling out to the bloodless god of the void. Follow me into the depths as we hunt for the immortal Voidwalker.
The other oligarchs assured me that if not for my standing, I would have been butchered on the spot like a sow past her prime. Instead, they gave me the dignity of exile. In truth, they fear me. They fear what I have achieved, what I have uncovered in the depths of our libraries. There is a power in the universe, a gnawing madness that threatens to unravel all we've built. It yearns for the blood that was taken, and we are but mere drops in the ocean of its torment. To defy a true god, a being so ancient it predates time, is folly. My eyes have been opened, and I now walk the true path to our ascension. The others cry heresy, but I could see the terror fester within them. They are more than willing to torture an old man for his alleged secrets to immortality, but yet even this trickle of knowledge strikes them with disgust. If only life was not but a flicker in the infinite stars. Oh, what I could do, what I could learn with several lifetimes.
And those, my friends, are the ravings of Naren Kur, the fourth oligarch who unceremoniously lost her position to exile because she was dabbling in the heresy of Chthon, the great bloodless god at the beginning of everything, who wants to destroy humanity and reclaim the blood that began creation. Or at least that's how it's explained in the game. Now, in the tomb, the corrupted temple, you can find yourself a monster shrine with the arcane, the scions of famine, the angry tentacle monsters from the void. This type of shrine is here very often, and if it weren't for my build specifically and being able to deal lots of damage from a very far range, this would be an incredibly scary shrine and I probably wouldn't click it. But since I'm being extra careful and know exactly what I'm doing with this build, I've got a pretty good grip on it, so we're going to let it rip. This location, just like the one in the first act with the High Priest Roldorathis and his followers, is actually a very interesting subsection of the Arkovian Undercity. This location, just like that one, is basically giving us an eye into what the Arkovian immortals were doing before they knew they were going to become the undying revenants of a very disturbed and unapologetic empire. We actually get to see yet again that the cult of Chthon has existed in Cairn, the world of Grim Dawn, for an extremely long amount of time. Because Arkovia is an ancient city as far as the history of Cairn goes, so we could compare it to something like Rome. And every empire has got its fair share of heresy. And that is where we are right now. This unique boss, Naren Kur, is the fourth oligarch who decided that immortality was far too small and short-sighted for someone like her. Naren Kur might not be the most imposing-looking boss, and she's certainly not the most difficult, even if she can pack a huge punch if you're not paying attention. But the boss is incredibly foreboding when you're thinking about the grandiose nature of Chthon and the cult of Chthon that are sprinkled without the game as one of the two main antagonist factions. So the tentacles of the void, so to speak, have made their way through history, have made their way through the modern apocalypse, and are still trying to end the realm of man as it continues in Grim Dawn. Now, I've said it before in this playthrough, and I'll say it plenty more times, I'm sure, but Grim Dawn has the most fantastic representation of Lovecraftian and cosmic horror in most games that I've played. Grim Dawn shares a lot of similarities to a lot of the eldritch beings of those mythos. I think it's fantastic that it does just that, and does it so well, because there's something to be said about this top-down isometric view, but these larger-than-life bosses, characters, and everything going on in the background being there to make the player feel small while they are so very small on the screen. It is incredibly thematic. But you can really see the reference and the reverence for Cthulhu, the Lovecraftian mythos, and specifically the cult of Cthulhu. Cthulhu in that mythos has a cult that predates history, written history. It's been around for as long as he has, as long as the earth has, really. And the cult does his bidding to attempt to bring him about and end the world. Ultimately, that's what the cult of Chthon is doing. They're just doing it differently. There's a little bit different rules in Grim Dawn, but you can see the reference and how well they utilize the parallels between the two entities in this game, and it is absolutely chef's kiss. Now on to our second detour before we venture down into the realm of the High Priest and the Lord Executioner. This is a lot shorter, I promise, but this is the second leg of the Hidden Path. The first of the Hidden Path was Dreeg, just outside of Lower Crossing, where we found Dreeg's runestone, and now we'll need to beat the Guardian of Salile to gain his runestone and continue down the Hidden Path. All of that will culminate in the runestone of Bismiel and the opening of the Hidden Path. Salile, the youngest, has a few words for us.
You have traveled far, Seeker, and seen much, but still the veil between worlds blinds you to the deeper truths. You stumble about the world we inhabit, eager for answers that the Empire and its Luminari deny. They think us heretics, followers of false gods, and yet none of them can claim to have witnessed the power of the deities. They're illusions. Show me the cripples that men here has cured, the armies that Oleron has toppled, the beasts that Bogdrogan spared from the hunt. You cannot, because they are not real. But the witch gods, born of man, had ascended to raise us from our own ignorance. If you are willing to listen, they may open your eyes as well. You now stand before the shrine of Salile, the youngest of the three. Eldritch fire is at his behest, the very essence of the Eldritch realm, his to mold and shape as he sees fit. Clothed in black robes that hide his gaunt frame, Salile guides unseen through the shadowy veil to hunt unwitting mortals for their vitality. Many a devout of Salile had been asked to make the ultimate sacrifice to present themselves before the Dark God and offer their life so that Salile may bestow his infinite wisdom upon those that remain. You, worthy seeker, do not yet have the attention of the gods, but know that with each step you take, you bring yourself closer to the three. Go now to the frozen lands of the north, where primitive tribes had constructed standing stones ages ago. Armed with the words of Salile and Dreeg, the way shall be opened to you.
So the second leg of the Hidden Path is over, and Salile has some foreboding words of his own. Definitely the most barbaric of the three gods, if I have to put such a fine point on it, but The hidden path is going to take us away from Act 2, so we'll leave that there. And you'll have to check back once we find the third runestone to finalize and finish the quest. Now, there is a bit of upkeep in this video, such as the shrine locations. There are 2, and there is the first one for you. The next one will be in the key dungeon when we make our way down, but I do want to, for anybody looking at this video who's interested in the build, show you the masteries for my Sentinel Ultimorna, and if you feel so inclined to use a build similar to this one, I'll give you those to start yourself off. Now, I do have a build guide video for this build on my channel as well. It is a little ways down, happened at the beginning of this lore playthrough. So right now, all I'm going to be giving you are the masteries and the way that I have them worked out. The gear is ultimately ever changing, and I am looking for specific stuff as we play through this story. So we're not finished, there is a lot of farming to do, but at the end of the day, the masteries are the most important part because that is how all of our damage is decided. You can find the devotions in the Grim Tools link. They're a little bit too big to ever get completely on the screen for editing, so until I figure out a way to do that, you're welcome to click the link and get the full build if you really want it. Otherwise, the masteries are there. Take them as you will. I think they work fantastically well, so let's focus on that. And now, with all the housekeeping out of the way, we can make our way down the Broken Hills into the Steps of Torment, and that is where everybody, I'm sure, clicked on the thumbnail for. Now, you might be familiar with the Steps of Torment as a key dungeon or a roguelike dungeon, however you want to call them in this game. What you might not be familiar with is why they're called the Steps of Torment and where they came from, because they are not a naturally occurring formation by any means. The Steps of Torment exist purely as a 5-tier dungeon for necromancers throughout the existence of the Arkovian Empire. The Arkovian royalty, in its infinite wisdom, banned necromancy and persecuted necromancers throughout their rule in their kingdom, in their empire. So many necromancers were sent to the Steps of Torment to be tortured, killed, or imprisoned, and none of them were safe from the reach of the Empire, not even the first necromancer, Arkovian. Now, Calderos will give us our next assignment. As the oligarchs have been wiped from the face of Arkovia, the land can now heal. But that creeping feeling from earlier still exists, and we can tell that there is yet unfinished business. Calderos gives us one last assignment to kill the High Priest Zarthuselan. The High Priest is the instigator of the persecution of necromancers throughout Arkovia, and ultimately the reason that Arkovian was imprisoned inside the Steps of Torment. This one man's arrogance and ultimately one man's decision would doom an entire country to a fate worse than death. Now, you may not have noticed right away because a lot of the time, especially when I'm playing a game the first time through, I'm not looking at the names of the maps. It's a new area, it's not a whole lot different, but each floor in the Steps of Torment has a different name of increasing severity. This becomes even more horrifying when you think about what the prison was created for and ultimately used to oppress one single class of people. The names of the maps within the Steps of Torment begin with pain, the simplest, easiest to understand, and I'm sure the easiest to inflict on the first floor of the dungeon. After dealing with pain, we get to misery. Misery is the second floor, and ultimately what happens when all you know is pain. Once the pain is inflicted, once the misery sets in, suffering, the third floor of the Steps of Torment, becomes all that you know as a prisoner underneath the ground. And finally, the 4th floor, Anguish, as all of the weight of the upper floors comes crashing down. All you can do is rage against the pain and the inevitability of it all. Further still, however, there is a deeper torment at the bottom of the steps. At the center of the final floor, on the floor of Anguish, there is a special room and a special boss solely to torture one individual. That individual being the first necromancer, Arobaruk, who is himself immortal and is being tortured not only because of his necromantic practices, but because the royalty of Arkovia want to be immortal just like him. Now you'll have to bear with me a little bit at this point because I may go a little bit freestyle on how the lore works. The Steps of Torment, unfortunately, don't have a lot to go off of, but what is there is disturbing enough to kind of extrapolate our own understanding and really open up just how ugly a place Arkovia was before they all became raving undead monsters. Zarthuselan sits at the bottom of the 2nd floor Misery. He's in a room all his own, guarding the Gates of Anguish. The gates are where you'll need your skeleton key to continue onto the final 2 floors of the Steps of Torment, but we're not quite there yet. Zarthuselan is the picture of crazed Grand Priest who thinks that they have the divine will of the gods on their side. The fight for this monster is exactly what you'd think it would be. A madman of a Grand Priest raising his undead followers from the floor to attack you while he rains down his divine might just above. The bolts are fire, and Zarthuselan, the Grand Priest, can call down the wrath of his zealotry to turn your character into ashes. This monster, this person, this character is the entire reason for the fall of Arkovia, the entire reason that the Act 2 of this game even exists in the way that it does. The Grand Priest is a monster and a tyrant of the highest order, even now in his undeath. So after all that, you're left with just one more question. If the Grand Priest was this instrumental, this terrible for the outcome of the world of Cairn, what could be hiding behind the Gates of Anguish?
The one they call Arobaruk makes mockery of the gods. The Lord Executioner cut at his flesh, but the wounds refuse to bleed. His limbs grow back, his skin is impervious to flame. I believe the time has come for me to descend into that vile place and deal with the heathen myself. We shall see how he reacts to the cleansing flame of the divine.
The Arkovian leaders are dead. Even after immortality and madness takes hold, we've scattered them to ashes, spread them on the winds so that the lands of Arkovia can finally recover and become inhabitable once again. At least that's how it should be, but there are still 2 floors of the Steps of Torment left. Behind the Gates of Anguish, yet another faceless, nameless monstrosity waits for our character, for our hero, to finally silence once and for all. Alchemos, the Lord Executioner of Arkovia, is the final boss waiting for us at the bottom of the Steps of Torment, and he won't be going away easily. Alkimos is an extremely high damage boss and ultimately only gives you one shot to kill him. If you fail or if you die in the key dungeon after the gates are opened, you do not get to reopen them after they close. If you want to take another shot at this boss or this key dungeon, you'll need to restart your session, go all the way through all the floors yet again, and bring another skeleton key to reopen the gates. Not a whole lot about this boss is written in the lore notes of this act or of the game period. A lot of what we know of Alkimos comes from the dialogue with Calderos just before he gives you the skeleton key to venture down, and small blurbs from lore notes. Before we meet this boss, though, there is a special location within the suffering floor of this key dungeon in which you can get yourself a right-handed shield under this statue in a little pot. That'll be the totally normal buckler. You're welcome for all you dual-wielding shielders out there. Now, Alkimos, unlike Zarthuselan, is a full ghost form boss. Just like the oligarchs, he is still very much the way that he looked in life, except spectral. He is a scythe-wielding sadist that has both the powers of the Nightblade and a necromancer based on his gear. Given that his whole persona was torturing the first necromancer for an undesirable amount of time, we can only assume that some of those necromantic tendencies wore off on this character and made him an even more insane sadist and torturer than he already was. It takes an extremely sick mind to take pleasure in causing pain to another human, but I can only imagine it would take an even more warped mind to inflict pain on another person, presumably forever. If the person that you're torturing can't die, then obviously inflicting pain on them is only for the sake of inflicting pain. There is another unique boss in this floor of the Steps of Torment as well, and that is Ilgor the Eternal. This is a skeletal gargantuan, and if you'll remember from our run-in with the Colosseum horror Karnak, you'll remember that these gargantuans come about when multiple undead individuals are taken over by a stronger undead individual. At least that's what I garnered from the note. Ilgor the Eternal has just been festering in this pit of bones, getting bigger and bigger, and has to be killed twice because, as one can imagine, at the heart of all things undead in Arkovia, you're probably going to be a pretty beefy guy. But now that our two pit stops are out of the way, we can make it down to the bottom floor and talk about the final room in the Steps of Torment. The bottom of the pit, after everything is said and done, is simply Oroboruk's torment. There is one final cage for the first necromancer specifically, while all the other necromancers and practitioners are trapped above him. The gates are open. We're crossing the bridge of crumbled rulers, long since dead or undead, to face down the final boss of the Arkovian Underlords. Alkimos is a formidable enemy at the end and should be avoided in an up-close confrontation as much as possible. But with one final throw of our Sentinel's shield, the Steps of Torment have been purged, and history can begin to heal. Or at least until the hunt for the Nemesis begins. Tune in next time for RPG Radio as we continue the ultimate lore through for Grim Dawn. Peace out, everybody.